Nice.
Well, I'm connecting with the state of Missouri and its history today because, listeners, I'm joined by the author of the recently released The Veiled Prophet, Secret Societies, White Supremacy, and the Struggle for St. Louis, Devin O'Shea, making his second appearance on Chapo now that the book is in stores. Welcome back to the show, Devin.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Like I said, it's been a while since we first had you on to talk about the Veiled Prophet. So just for benefit of our listeners, let's just do a little refresher course.
Sure.
What is the Veiled Prophet Society, and how did you get onto this story? Like, how did this book start to come together? When did you get the idea to write about this organization?
Yeah, the Veiled Prophet Society is like a secret men's club that has a mascot that's sort of a Mardi Gras character who also happens to be a Klansman, as the book outlines. And I had sort of first come to it because it was like 2017 and I was doing an MFA looking for a way to do like a Thomas Pynchon-esque novel about St. Louis, even though Jonathan Franzen had already beat me to it. The 27th City is a Pynchon-esque novel about St. Louis, and it has the Veiled Prophet in it. There's like a scene. But I was like, okay, I can definitely do it better. And my mom had actually tipped me off to like, you should look into this weird parade that used to happen when I was a kid. And so that kind of started me down that path.
The Veiled Prophet Society, I feel like myself, like most Americans, I first became aware of it when the news broke that the unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt was their veiled prophetess. That this, she was in Bridesmaids, and then it's just like, you see this photo of her. So like, where does the imagery and iconography of this group come from?
Yeah, this definitely is what's interesting about the Veiled Prophet is that it is like something that is cast in amber from literally 1878. And so it is like a first wave Klansman, basically. It's got like some literary cover to make you think that maybe this is the reference to a Thomas More poem. But as I outline in the book, it was invented by a Confederate cavalry officer. And when he first appears in the newspaper, he's got a pistol and two rifles and a Bowie knife stuck in his belt. And he's coming to St. Louis, and he will not be stopped by any striking trolley workers.
Well, yeah. The book begins with the Great Railroad Strike that took place in this country in the 1870s. And I want to get into the history of that because it's fascinating.
Yeah.
But just like from a broader perspective, secret societies, right? Like,
yeah,
they exist throughout history, and of course, like the obvious interest is there among the public. Why? Because they're secret.
Yeah.
Like you give like sort of a broad history of like groups like the Freemasons, right?
Sure.
What is like a more modern? I know like they like to date themselves back to the Temple of Solomon, but we don't have to go back that far. But like, what exactly for a group like the Freemasons was kind of a template for the Veiled Prophet Society? Like, what is? I don't know, like what is the class and kind of ideological makeup of this sort of particular kind of social construction? Like, what needs does it fulfill? Like, who joins it, and like, what do they actually do?
Yeah, I think that's so fascinating because you really are like. The book is about St. Louis and about secret societies, but it's like a literary study of this character that they make the centerpiece of their thing. And what's so interesting about Freemasonry or the Oddfellows or the Knights of Columbus is that they are making up a fictional sort of belief system. In the book, I talk about secret societies as they are, you construct like hidden knowledge, right? You have to like form a void, and there's an organic pull to want to know what they're up to in the meetings.
Yeah.
The eyes wide shut thing is like, you just want to hear. I think what's so effective about that film is that like you don't get hardly anything about what's going on internal politics wise of those guys,
Give up your inquiries.
Yeah,
They are useless. Yeah.
That's the only memo. And like you don't get the we have to have another fucking meeting because we need some more fucking dues in here,
Well, yeah, like okay, so they assume for themselves as part of their sort of heraldry this kind of a deep historical mythology that they're reaching into some sort of past that they're drawing from.
Yeah.
They're guardians of some sort of secret knowledge. But at the same time, like you said, most of these are just kind of boys clubs where like the fellas get together and like drink and party and get up to no good.
Yeah, it's like I think most secret societies can be just redescribed as sort of a drinking club with Robert's Rules of Orders. Like the Freemasons actually are really important because basically every club, in my understanding, there's like the golden age of Freemasonry. That's where the Morgan affair happens, where they like supposedly kill a guy who's about to publish a book about a secret society, not giving anybody any ideas. It's already out there. You can't get me now. But that dissolves basically in the Civil War, and then you restart a big wave of secret clubs, and they're all modeled on Freemasonry.
Yeah, this Freemasons, like, they provide the template for like all these other groups, right?
Including the Klan. Yeah. That they, and to construct like, it's like archaic affectations to say like, actually we discovered something that's 40,000 years old and we just like now have secret knowledge about it, but it's been around. So like, that's a major component. And the Veiled Prophet guys build their tradition. They invent it and then like keep it going, riffing on it every year.
All right, so like the guys who build this tradition, I mean, I think your book is about secret societies. That's kind of like, you know, that's the pull for the reader here. But really, I think the thing that most impressed me about this book is it is a really fascinating history of one American city.
Yeah.
And that city is St. Louis. And what I found so interesting about that is if you look at the history of, you know, any city in America, what you're seeing is like a kind of laid underneath all of it is this cycle of like capitalist boom and bust, of economic growth and collapse.
Absolutely.
So like, how does how does St. Louis fit into that archetype? And who are the people who started the Veiled Prophet? And like, where did they come out of in St. Louis? And that point is history of the economy and culture of St. Louis.
Yeah, that's a great question because I think what's interesting about St. Louis is that it is like too big to ignore and too small to pay attention to. It is like in the blind
gateway
spot.
to the West.
It's the gateway to the West, but the arch is also like a civil rights symbol too in the city. It's got all these contradictions of being, you know, to Southerners we're Yankees, but to anyone north of us we're a bunch of Southerners.
Right.
You're at the edge of the Midwest. And the big grand story of St. Louis is that at one time it was going to be the biggest city in the U.S. It was going to eclipse New York. They were going to move D.C. to St. Louis. This was in the 1890s. So it turns out that didn't happen.
At one time, Kingston, New York was the capital of the state.
Yeah. And so like the big narrative is that everything that was happening in the city is basically over a century old and that it has been in some form of decline since basically the 40s and 50s. But that what's interesting about studying a city like that then is to see how the sort of ruptures and, crises in capital sort of like ripple through St. Louis first sometimes before they get somewhere else, like the Black Lives Matter movement.
Yeah. And obviously like Ferguson sort of bookends this story, and which is why it's interesting that you open with the Great Railroad Strike of 1877. Could you give us some context for like, both like how big the railroad industry was in America post-Civil War and just like how widespread and how unbelievably violent this strike was. And like, because, you know, another thing about the history of American cities is that you can read onto them both a history of growth, of immigration, but also progress.
Yeah.
Underneath all of that as well is a history of counter-revolutions or reactions to progress in terms of like, and then if this is an American story, you're talking about progress in terms of like the enfranchisement of black people and labor rights. And then like that's where this kind of story begins in the rail worker strike of 1877. Could you give us some of the context for that?
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating because historians have given it the most boring name possible. It's the Great Railroad Strike of 1877.
It's like, were the trains not running on time or something?
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, what happened is much more exciting because I think there's a line in Against the Day in Pynchon where he says that the railroad network of this time is the iron skeleton of the United States. It is like the body, and that like the strike starts in Pennsylvania, Ohio, or starts in Pennsylvania, Baltimore, moves west through Ohio, through
moves through the skeleton of this country,
exactly
through the rail network. Yeah.
Another historian said it was like lightning struck the tracks and went straight west.
Yeah.
And then it gets to St. Louis, and St. Louis is right on the periphery of like everything west of St. Louis is still deadwood country.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like it's still the frontier. And so at the very fringe in St. Louis, there's a general strike. It expands from just railway workers to everybody marching in the streets. A bunch of workers with like coupling pins and like sort of a nonviolent strike, but still bringing the armaments of their trade along with them,
like sledgehammers, rail ties,
just in
things
case.
of that nature.
Yeah.
Okay. So what were they actually striking over? Because like the railroads, like the rail barons were like the richest people in America, the people who owned the railroads, and this was like, like kind of like almost like the Silicon Valley of that era, if not even bigger.
For sure.
If not even bigger, it was a huge, unbelievable source of untrammeled wealth that was unimaginable.
Yeah.
What was the issue that the workers were organizing and striking over?
Yeah, I mean, this comes after the Long Depression, which is like it was called the Great Depression at the time, and then we had an even worse one, so we had to rename it.
But this was right after the Civil War, right? Another crisis of sort of boom and bust and economic collapse.
And actually, what's interesting about this strike is that this is a nationwide strike, and the National Guard gets called in all different directions, which makes it a more effective strike. And that it also signals the end of Reconstruction because they literally move troops out of the South to northern cities to put down the strike. So it's like the end of Reconstruction, the beginning of labor struggle. And then St. Louis is specifically interesting for robber barons like Jay Gould because, it's hard to construct a big bridge over the Mississippi River at this time, and that just forms an incredible bottleneck for capital. And so if you can control that bridge to the west, you control all of the train traffic, all of the goods going back and forth, and that's a powerful note.
I mean, in your book, I mean, like you talk about how like in the press of the day, you basically had this strike was thought of in apocalyptic terms by the elites of the day, the owners of capital, and you had people giving voice publicly to the idea that all of these strikers should be killed, like by the military, and the strike was put down by former Civil War generals.
Yes, a multi opinionated coalition of both Union and the city leaders appointed a Union and a Confederate general to help put down the strike, and sort of like shaking hands of like, well, time to get to work. And it's really fascinating because they're like, the strike is being provoked by outside immigrants from Red Europe, and they're over here stirring things up. In fact, it was a totally organic strike, and it comes from the fact that everyone was completely immiserated and, work in St. Louis. The other thing that was happening is that wages were not just flat, they were going down. There were wage cuts more and more and more, and you just needed a ton of bodies to actually operate like this mechanical form of capital, especially for railroad stuff.
And in St. Louis in particular, like, how violently was this strike suppressed?
Yeah, and elsewhere it was actually more violently. Like there was a whole thing, I think, in Baltimore where it was just like the National Guard shot a bunch of guys and they got herded into a roundhouse, and then the workers set the roundhouse on fire. In St. Louis, the strike is incredibly successful because the workers do not set fire to anything. They conceive of the city as their property, and they clog the streets with parades. And then the strike committee gets a little wary, and the strike peters out, and the National Guard assembles along with a bunch of deputized guys. And then they eventually come to this crisis point where the strikers can either take the arsenal downtown and arm everyone, or the whole thing peters out and the executive committee balked, and then the police forces charge into Schuyler's Hall, and everybody has to run for their life. And luckily, you could just escape out west. So you're just like, okay, well, see you, civilization.
Okay, so like this is a story people might be familiar with: the suppression of radical labor movements in America, often by armed or military force.
Yeah.
But how does the veiled prophet come into this? Because I think the interesting thing is like you have this nationwide display of worker power against the owners of the railroads and the banks, owners of capital. How does the Veiled Prophet and their parades are another very interesting part of this book that I want to talk about. But like, how does this, the formation of this kind of secret society and its iconography and the people involved in it, like how is that created as kind of a cultural or sort of, I don't know, symbolic response to nascent worker power in this country?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, the general strike for the year afterwards really freaked out the city fathers. A bunch of them like left town. They were afraid that the workers were going to turn off water to their mansions, and they like were going to make, their servants go and fetch water from the bathtub for them. And in the newspapers, you can see them getting more and more paranoid. And so Alonzo Slayback, ex-Confederate cavalry officer and sort of Democratic mob boss, Bill the Butcher figure for sure.
Now you tasted my mutton. How do you like it, huh?
Comes up with the idea that we have to have a parade basically in the summer to commemorate our victory over the workers. And so on the first parade float that the Veiled Prophet appears on, it's him. We know that it is the chief of police who plays the Veiled Prophet that year, John Priest, and he is with a executioner on top of that float, and then between them is a bloody butcher's block. And so there's a very clear message being sent to the working class that this is basically a Klansman. This is the monopoly on violence being deployed against you.
And obviously that's directed at workers, but there is their victory over the strike, but this is just a mere decade or so after their defeat in the Civil War. So there's a much larger defeat that looms and fear that looms over all of this, and that is the abolition of slavery and the victory of the Union in the Civil War.
Absolutely. Yeah, because another thing that the general strike in St. Louis is truly unique because it was a multiracial strike. The roustabout labor in St. Louis it's where you have to haul things on and off steamships. And it was the first profession to be abandoned by whites, and African Americans, many ex-slaves, did that job. And so the strike is like this multiracial coalition, and especially where, this is I think Matt has talked about this a lot, of just like trying to take the plantation system and then apply it to the factory system, and how like it just doesn't work that way. And also there's a Eric Hobsbawm thing about how cities of this time are built to be almost like preternaturally disposed to getting a rabble together, because there's no cars, right? There's no so you can literally walk out your door and go a few blocks down and suddenly join a giant mob of people. Everybody has to be pretty close together.
I think about that because St. Louis is an example of a city that people use all the time, where you show like photographs of what it looked like in 1900 versus now. And basically like an urban area that was home to probably like 30,000 people is currently like a parking lot.
Yeah.
And like the ways in which cars and roads were used to kind of create literal physical barricades against such the kind of general labor action or strikes or rabble that you're talking about.
Exactly.
That exists in pedestrian-friendly cities.
Yeah, it really is. This is the biggest problem with St. Louis today, is that the interstate system totally carves up the entire city. It's also a city that is meant to be huddled around that bend in the Mississippi River where the steamships come off of, and that hasn't been important economically for 120 years or whatever. And that, there's a bunch of stuff also in the book about this, urban renewal. Basically evicting Mill Creek, which was this gigantic middle class to lower middle class African American neighborhood, pushing and redlining all African Americans in St. Louis up north into North St. Louis, just in time for deindustrialization in the 60s and 70s. There's an ongoing point in the book that the Veiled Prophet Society is like designing the city to be very, very segregated, to have these big barriers. The Delmar Divide is another big one.
So, I want to talk about parades. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking about parades, but you talk about like how the importance of them to American society in the early chapters of your book. And in particular, you use a word here that I hadn't encountered before, but I really liked it. You refer to like the Klan and parades as a kind of psychological defense mechanism for the defeated, as a way to kind of peacefully, but wink, wink, not so peacefully, sort of symbolically assert their power. And you refer to the Klan as a charivari, which is a type of theatrical mob morality that is drawn from Europe. And could you just like expand on that idea? Because I remember when I was in Belfast, I saw a version of this.
Oh, really?
Because they were getting ready for their color days.
Oh, yeah.
Their sort of their parade days in Belfast, which are very much about like physically marking out the borders between Protestant and Catholic neighborhoods.
Oh, shit.
And the orange, they have these big bonfires that they burn in effigy, Jerry Adams or Irish
sick.
republicanism. But it's about like showing the color, and you march through and past the Catholic churches and Catholic neighborhoods. So it's about like marking out the borders of your territory, but also going to the opposing sort of camp and saying, hey, just to remind you, here's our marching band. But
right.
Hey, like,
this is how strong we are, and if we needed to mobilize, we could do it.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, how does that figure into the narrative that you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is really fascinating. It's also called what is it? A skimmington in England is like charivari is this ancient medieval tradition where it's just like French for loud music. So if you had a problem with somebody in the village, or maybe they were of the wrong religion or marrying the wrong kind of person, or they were stealing stuff from you, you have caught the ire of the community, and instead of like doing a usual filing a police report with the medieval sheriff, you just get a bunch of guys together and like hit a bunch of pots and pans.
This is the anarchist criminal justice model.
Exactly. But also you like put on a costume and you sort of do this fun little march to their house, and then maybe you hang them in effigy, like make a little doll of them, or maybe you drag them out of their house and like beat them up or something like that. And that sort of gets carried forward by the Klan, especially in the aftermath of the Civil War, where the rule of plantation violence has to be reasserted. And so there's like this dynamic of always rounding up a posse of guys to go and get rid of somebody who wants to enfranchise African Americans in the county. Whoever is the Republicans are the good guys at this time, whoever is trying to rally votes for the Republican Party. And that like you have to put on a character costume. And so a lot of these early Klansmen would pretend to be men from the moon, or they would be the ghosts of Shiloh back from the dead.
Another interesting thing is you talk about like these sort of two eras of the Klan in American history. And the interesting thing is like the era right after the Civil War.
Yeah,
that's very different than what we imagine the Klan now is, with the white hoods and the sort of the symbolism. Like, what accounts for like those two eras of the Klan that you talk about in this book as like, and the evolution and sort of, I don't know, mainstreaming of this kind of secret society?
Yeah, I think that's what's most interesting about the Veiled Prophet as like a literary character, because you are like getting an insight into the psychology of these guys that invent him. And the same way with like the Klan.
I just think about that because like of what we think of like the iconic Klansman figure, like the hooded KKK. All those guys, like they invented that in the 20th century after seeing the movie Birth of a Nation about the original guys.
Exactly. Yeah. In fact, what's so weird about that is that the first wave and the second wave are totally different. Like the first wave is dabbling in a little bit of Satanism or having like a black mass, or they're like demons. They're sort of like, or going back to Greek mythology. And then the second wave is much more focused on Christianity. They're very bigoted against Catholics and anti-Semitic. The first wave is very much about plantation violence and about just a purely racialized terrorist campaign that also like spreads through the newspapers as like a meme, basically. So you hear about Klan violence and then you can go recreate it. Birth of a Nation plays much more of a role in the second one.
Well, speaking of planned terror campaigns, can you talk about the characters of Alonzo and Charles Slayback?
Yeah.
That's a real Dickensian name for these fellows.
Yeah.
Alonzo Slayback. Who is he and how does he come into your story?
Alonzo is like the founding father of the Veiled Prophet Society. He's a true, like, he is a guy who fights every day for the like continuation and the prosperity of the slave plantation system. He's born in Missouri. He goes to Bleeding, Kansas, and is like stockpiling arms and doing raids into Kansas against free soilers. He joins the cavalry. He's very poetic. He loves to like write poetry and be engaged with like chivalry and like English chivalry.
Yeah, he had a group of like Lancers, they called them, and they were obsessed. Yeah, the Swayback Lancers, and they were obsessed with chivalry. Yes, medieval chivalric codes and honor.
Which is like, yeah, you have to be brave enough to get on a horse and charge into like buckshot. So you do have to have like a really good like idea of what you're doing. Yeah. And he was, by all accounts, like totally insane in that way. Then he was also, I don't know, he's a man of many shades, because then he was also falling ill all the time and had to be nursed back to health by his wife. He has a brief, after the war ends, he ends up in Mexico trying to found another slave colony called the New Virginia Colony that eventually fails as the Emperor Maximilian is on the way out. He has to come back to St. Louis. They just let him right back into being a lawyer. And then he's like a political, gregarious, big personality. And then his brother Charles has worked his way up the financial ladder in New Orleans. The Long Depression hits, Charles comes up to St. Louis, and now you've got Democratic mob boss and financial power starting the Veiled Prophet Society with a bunch of barge barons and agricultural sort of, barons.
So outside the parades and the pageantry and the costumes and the fun like that, what are these guys up to? Like, I mean, you mentioned a few of them. Like, who are they, and what are they actually doing? And like, they're drawn from, like you said, the city fathers, the baron class of St. Louis, but like, what do they do in like you described it as sort of stag night with Robert's Rules of Orders? Like, what are they up to?
Yeah, I mean, at first it's like that really crazy parade where there's like a executioner, and then they all decide that we gotta like back away from that. That's like a little too intense for everybody, and so they sort of cast around for like, now we're going to do sort of a fairy fete. We're going to all dress as fairies, but we're men, and we're like the biggest wholesaler in town. And so they're trying to be more fun and more Midsummer's Night Dream with it. But eventually it also becomes very much about the debutante ball. And so there's like a dance after the first parade, but that then eventually morphs into not just having a belle of the ball, but crowning a queen of love and beauty, which is really strange because when the queen is crowned, it is not anything to do with her necessarily. It's to do with what her father did for St. Louis that year.
Okay.
And so they're honoring each other, and then they're putting a crown on one of the daughters. And so the debutante ball is this weird, pretty Victorian way also of keeping a bunch of bloodlines intermarrying and stuff like that.
But also, like, you mentioned the first parade being one that's literally like a mock execution of like a striking worker carried out by like the masked head of the police department.
Yeah.
And then they're like, okay, well, we've established that symbolically, but like, we need to grow, and we need to offer something a little bit more optimistic towards the public,
and something for the ladies.
It's something for the ladies as well. And like, in the inclusion of like the daughter of the year, is it something to do with like, I don't know, not just having something for the ladies, but like representing, I don't know, youth or vitality and kind of, I don't know, like the future as a way of passing on this lineage, like you said, keeping the bloodlines and the money sort of, like out in the right hands.
Yeah, I mean, I think it very much is about that, and like, putting your daughter into. I mean, it is very crassly using your daughter as like a business decision to like shore up ties in a very Game of Thrones kind of way, and to like, to link yourselves to somebody else who you think is like on the up and up. But then it's also, I think, it is a patriarchal thing too, to be able to like, I can control who gets to be like the most, I mean, becoming the queen then becomes like your kind of a celebrity automatically, and like you
get to be in Bridesmaids.
Yeah, exactly. You get to you get invited to like ribbon cuttings and like to visit the hospital, sick children and stuff like that. And so it's like you have the power to create celebrity at the same time. And I think that's like, I talk about secret societies as prestige economies, and that like if there's more people with more prestige in the secret society, then it like is totally in the black. It's like a brokerage for prestige. And so you get to like distribute it out to whoever you want, including the guy who gets to play the Veiled Prophet that year, who then is like infallible, is sort of the deal, is if you get to be the infallible VP for the year. I don't really know how they didn't share a lot of their internal documentation with me, so I don't know how that worked exactly.
So you get the Slayback brothers who sort of moderate the prophet's image, but like they also like are strongly anti-abolitionist, obviously coming out of that, but also like there was a great deal of German immigration to Missouri in the 19th century, and the German population were anti-slavery. So what was the Veiled Prophet's reaction to Germans?
Yeah, that big problem.
Yeah.
Huge problem. The Germans are really fascinating. Again, Matt did a great War Nerd episode about the history of Germans in the Civil War.
Yeah.
And yeah, in St. Louis specifically, there's just a ton of 48ers who end up settling after the 1848 revolutions fail. And that was when Europe is sort of convulsing out of the medieval age into the capitalist age. And the proletariat or the bourgeois is going to take over. And that's sort of the first wave of socialism. This is Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, like contemporary with them. All these 48ers end up in St. Louis. They live in a district that is right next to the slave auction blocks in St. Louis, and they like have to witness the like disgusting just like display day in and day out. And they see plantation owners as the same problem as monarchs, kings, people who can own other people. And
well, I mean, like, and the people who love that shit, they self-consciously styled themselves after a fashion of medieval feudalism.
Yeah, it's no mistake that the Veiled Prophet is the monarch of Khorasan, that he comes to St. Louis on a flying carpet, and he's the king of Khorasan, where slavery is still legal.
And that's the Star Wars planet, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's the one that's all just a big city.
It's the sand palace.
You'll notice that slavery does exist in the Star Wars universe as well.
Yeah, Jabba the Hutt's palace, you know it is. Those guys aren't free in there. No way.
So that's St. Louis as it emerges out of the Civil War and like starts growing as a city, but like it really takes off. How does St. Louis expand, and how does the story of St. Louis change, and how does the story of the Veiled Prophet change in the 20th century as like a huge industrial boom grows the population of the city and its wealth and like becomes like a boom town?
Yeah, I mean, there's a very scary point in writing and researching the book where I realized how big the military industrial complex in the city is, and that you can track sort of like there's the Olin ammunition plant, right? And they're making bullets for people who are going out west, and then there's Shapley rifles, and those are being produced to settle the frontier. And then the Spanish-American War hits, and that kind of gets a little bigger, and then World War I hits, and that gets like way, way bigger. Then World War II. By World War II, there's a guy named Bixby in St. Louis who just becomes one of the richest guys in the country. By the end of World War II, there's a line about how every piece of armor in the U.S. military like has a Bixby, like it was from Bixby, basically. He was making train cars before that and just shifted it over to tanks and weaponry and stuff. And so there's a through line in the book in the 20th century around how, the Veiled Prophet gets really popular at first. It sort of dies down. There's these different parallel shadow governments in St. Louis, the Big Cinch.
Yeah. I want to talk about the Big Cinch. Who another group of elites with a cool name.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, this is actually kind of like the hidden lesson to the book. If you want to wield power in America, both covertly and also overtly, you need a cool name and you need like cool symbolism and heraldry.
I don't think I'm being immodest when I say that joining the Christmas Adventurers Club means that you are a superior man.
Right. Yeah. The big cinch is perfect. It's good branding.
Yeah.
And that was coined by William Reedy, who was like a literary editor, because he was basically saying like, everybody in this town knows that everything here is rigged. Like all outsiders are being shut out of all the industry. It's only 5 guys basically who are making all the big decisions, and they all meet at the Noonday Club together, and they're the big cinch. And he was basically right. The big cinch basically gets the World's Fair done, and there's sort of crossover between the cinch and the Veiled Prophets. It's just like, this is prime robber baron hours. The only way to get anything done is just to get all of these guys with all of the capital to want to do it. And so you move out of the big cinch era, and then the Veiled Prophets get super popular because debutante balls come back in the 40s as like an in vogue thing. And so by the 50s, you just get into this like the apex of the queenship being on television and like people watching in taverns as like this big glittery ball and procession is put on with a bunch of like people in costumes. There's a real fucked up era of wearing rubber masks with like that are, I don't know, styled as different characters. There's like Uncle Tom. Like there's a lot of blackface happening too. You might be surprised to find out.
Yeah, you will eventually. You will need to do that too. Eventually.
Sure.
In any secret society in America, at some point you're going to have to put the shoe polish on.
It's Mardi Gras. Okay?
Yeah.
It's about role reversals.
Yeah.
And that's the ultimate one. Yeah, and so like it really culminates or gets huge, and then it all builds up into the 1972 unveiling, the big crescendo.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned Mardi Gras and this kind of, like the wearing of costumes and these kind of symbolic role reversals, or like the Roman Saturnalia, where the emperor would like appear as a commoner,
yes,
and then the commoner would don the purple robe of the imperial. The Veiled Prophet thing to me seems to be like, it's all that, but there's no reversal.
Yes.
It's just like, it's the people who rule you, and then they're like, we're dressing in funny costumes. We still rule you. You don't get a costume. What if we took Mardi Gras and sort of stopped the role reversal, and we just kind of, put on a goofy little hat? I think that is where there is like room to change how we do things in St. Louis, is to bring back the actual Mardi Gras sensation. Because like you say, there is a real, the medieval ages, when Mardi Gras is happening, it's because the church and the state are so oppressive that there needs to be this giant party to just let everybody fart and don't
eat
you also
and
kind of mention that Freemasonry grew out of like, people need to just do something with how fucking boring Protestantism was.
Yeah, it was a big.
It was
theme.
like so stilted. Like they needed like someplace to go to fucking
Exactly. The church is like losing the stained glass and the nice like music, and is just becoming more and more sterile. And they're like, what if we worshipped like science, but it's God and light, and we do it in private? I think it is about having fun, and that like the Veiled Prophet Ball, like you say, is just like the ultimate irony of the commoners don't get to have fun. We're going to have all the fun for you, and we still expect you to feel libidinally satisfied through our merrymaking.
our joy and depravity and and
which
decadence.
I think that hits right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially with the Peter Thiel Secret Society.
I was going to get to that. The secret societies in the modern world, but as the book goes on, I mean, obviously, like you go through chapter after chapter, it's like, here's another race riot where a few hundred people are killed. And I go back to this idea about parades, and particularly like in a Reconstruction was defeated conclusively by removing troops to suppress workers elsewhere in the country, which is amazing. But like post Civil War, and then eventually post Civil Rights Movement, and when you see like today, like there's something about like how the culture of white supremacy in this country, or the culture and ideology of like the white man's role, and the violent suppression of any challenge to that. It finds its manifestation in these, like, not pun intended, has to be veiled in some way. So it has to be like it appear in the guise of something else. And how do you see that in the Veiled Prophet Society, or like this whole story?
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's built into it that it has to slip through with some version of cover. So there has to be this poem that sort of covers things up because the Grant administration made covering your face on the highways illegal because they were trying to crack down on the Klan. They rounded up and imprisoned and fined the Klan out of existence. So it had to be federally suppressed. And so the Veiled Prophet is perfect and obviously comes from, there's all of this evidence about why he's a Klansman, but it's like, well, we can get through if we call it a little bit of theater and we have a little dress up instead of being a like perfect Klansman or a bunch of guys in Klans robes roaming around. I think it's because it's wildly unpopular that you have to do that. It is truly a minority position that really thinks that whiteness is supreme and that there's no room for other cultures or understandings of other people. And that I think this is always endemic in reactionary right wing.
Yeah, but it can't be too veiled. Right? No. Yeah. Because like you want a little bit, you just want like enough of the wink that those in the know are all getting the joke, but it's like it can't be too discreet because you want everyone else to have that plausible deniability, but still just be like, if you call someone out on it, be like, oh no, this guy's dressed like Santa Claus. This isn't a Klan figure.
It's funny. Like, they're all wearing sort of Hawaiian shirts now. Or like, if it's too subtle, maybe Kyle Rittenhouse doesn't know exactly what to do at the right time. Because I think it is it is stoking a fire a little bit at a time. Because if it gets too big, I think this has been well said elsewhere, but it's just a wildly minority opinion. It has to be like propped up and encouraged. Like, I don't know, I just think about how Elon Musk controlling so much of the internet discourse or just the media consolidation is like, that's the only reason that these ideas can proliferate and become so ensconced in young men, especially, is like, the whole game is rigged. The whole thing is like, it's rigged to do this subtle dog whistling thing to channel people down that Nick Fuentes road.
But like, if you are a young man, like, and you're being, if you're circling that particular fucking drain, like what's at the bottom of the sewer has to be something that seems a little fun, right? It has to be like you said, having fun with the boys,
right?
Like,
having some beers,
exactly,
putting on a silly costume, and having a big. I do think that that is a really important. People need to feel like they're joining a movement that is a party, and that we're going to have fun while we do this thing. I mean, I think that gets well represented even in, what's the Edward Norton movie about being a Nazi?
American History X.
Yes. Like, they're having a big parties every time you see all the white supremacists
together. They have their own bands. And
bands, they're drinking beer in the backyard, shooting guns in the air. Like, that is a big appeal. And I think that's also how fraternities work, too. Mm-hmm. It's just like, the fraternity gets to tell you whatever they want at the ideological level because what they're promising is like, you're going to live in a house that has basically a bar in it where all the girls have to come through the house to get drunk. So like, that's the deal basically.
but I think fraternities are a good example because everyone has fun. Mm-hmm. Then you graduate college and the social networks are still there.
Yeah.
Everyone's like, everyone's dad gets them a fucking job, everyone's dad can get you a job. So the ideology persists, like, even if you're not aware of it. It transmutes itself through the pageantry, through the fun, even if it works so effectively because you might not even be aware of it.
Yeah. And I think what's also important, like, is that the Veiled Prophets also, you have to pledge and then you have to get basically hazed or you have to jump through a bunch of hoops and then you get initiated and then you become a member. And that like little pipeline is a intensely effective tool for binding people together. Like I think it gets underestimated because it seems frivolous or something like that. But that does create
almost like by design, because if you try to raise an alarm about how fucking weird and creepy this all is, they're like, just look, it's silly. It's just it's an
you don't want to get blackballed from here, do you? Or like, we'll just pretend we don't know you, and we'll ruin your life if you try to leave or raise a flag about it.
Right.
I think that is like a big part of, I don't know. Male friendship is a really difficult thing to be like earnest about, and it is true that like a lot of these guys get into these clubs and these secret societies mostly because they just want, 15 dudes they can go and hang out with whenever they want.
So sort of like to jump ahead in history and to get this story like post World War II in the 20th century. First off, could you talk about you've talked about how St. Louis is like you had a sort of like a slightly chilling moment to realize just how much the city of St. Louis is involved in the military industrial complex and the arms industry of this country. But a figure I want to talk about that comes up in your book is Clark Clifford, who served in the Lyndon Johnson administration. Oh, yeah. Could you talk about like how he fits into the story?
Yeah, Clark Clifford is like, this book is packed with guys. There's a lot of different guys. And Clark Clifford, I think, is one of the most interesting because he is the veiled prophet man who gets in the door to D.C. through the Harry Truman administration, a Missouri
machine politician,
from Kansas City, the Pendergast machine. He gets in, and then Clark Clifford becomes immensely powerful because he controls Truman's poker games on Friday nights. And so he gets to say who gets to sit at the table and who gets in and who's out. And he translates basically being in the Truman administration where, I don't know, this is just a weird accident of history. Truman immediately crushes another railroad strike and like destroys a coal miner strike. And Clark Clifford is like famously the guy who's like, you got to get really hard on these guys. You got to not give an inch in this post, World War II era where it's like, we were allied with the USSR to destroy Nazism. And it's like, well, we could become a little bit more like the USSR, maybe. No,
we're going to become a little bit more like the other one.
Yeah, we're going to go the other way and subsume a bunch of those guys and actually put some of them in NASA. And
and Clark Clifford, very good friends with
Werner von Braun, favorite guy.
Another great guy that comes up in this book.
Clark Clifford also a huge advocate for the establishment of Israel. He which is bizarre also that just like who basically greenlights the establishment of Israel. It's a bunch of guys from Missouri. We're not sending our best.
And believe me, like I talk about parades again. I was, of course, reading your book. I was thinking about the Israel Day parades that just happened here in New York.
God,
and it's just like there's another example of like kind of the symbolic demonstration in power. And if you're like,
who's in the parade?
This sickens me that this fucking like these war criminals are walking the streets of New York free and unmolested by the law or anyone else. They're just like, oh, this is not about them. This is a parade for Jewish people. And if you don't like that, you don't like Jewish people.
Wow, that's a lot. The mayor should be going to all parades.
Right, yeah. It is a powerful way of saying who's in, who's out, who supports this, and like who literally has control over the streets in a really strange way. But yeah, Clark Clifford then sticks around through like 7 presidencies. He basically invents lobbying and like is a big antitrust law guy. He does like real estate deals for JFK and like he's the advisor to presidents. At one point,
he's the guy that gets a lot of credit for telling Nixon that Vietnam's a bad idea after basically starting the war.
After being like, we could totally win this. This would be so easy.
Played by Donald Sutherland in the very great John Frankenheimer made-for-TV movie The Path to War.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah. That's the thing about Clark Clifford. Perfectly coiffed hair.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, and very tall, and everybody remarks.
He was a veiled prophet.
Oh, yeah. He was probably like... I don't know if he ever played the role, but when he gets into the Truman White House, there's just like, he is the guest of honor of he gets to like take the Queen of Love and Beauty up the aisle. Everybody's so proud of him. And he gets bankrolled by another guy in the Veiled Prophet Society. And then he gets into a whole thing with Lyndon Johnson about like pulling out of it. He pretends that it was his idea to pull out and that he's taking a big stand against, this clearly idiotic war.
I mean, like a guy with a uniquely malign influence on American history. And then it's just fun to find out that one of these names, they were the Veiled Prophet.
Yeah.
Now, to move slightly to another Missourian, and I don't want to give a bad impression of Missouri because I opened up this interview talking about my favorite Missourian, Mark Twain, one of the greatest Americans of all time.
For sure.
But another Missourian, James Earl Ray. And I bring this up.
Yeah.
Because I did not know this. I'm quoting here. In 1978, the Veiled Prophet was brought front and center before the House Select Committee on Assassinations for the alleged actions of one of its men who was very active in the 1960s. John Sutherland, a member of the Veiled Prophet Society and a supporter of George Wallace. They were questioned in connection to what was called a player in the conspiracy of Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination.
That's right.
So, I mean, this could be its whole episode, but like,
yeah,
in terms of like what you have, I don't know, researched into the assassination of Martin Luther King, what role, if any, did the Veiled Prophet play, and what do you make of the whole? Because, like, to me, this is an assassination that has as many sort of jaw-dropping, are you really, is that for real?
Yeah.
As the Kennedy assassination does, but it's one that's very much, like, forgotten about. I mean, not the assassination, but the idea that there is a conspiracy behind it.
Yeah.
So how did the Veiled Prophet get dragged before the Committee on Assassinations in 1978?
Yeah, there's a guy in St. Louis who I say is like the reincarnation of Alonzo Slayback. He is John Sutherland. He is a lawyer. He is from the South, and he is basically in charge of the White Citizens Councils in St. Louis. These were counter civil rights organizations, as maybe the title suggests, white supremacists, pro George Wallace, and John Sutherland is a big Veiled Prophet guy. He's in a bunch of different clubs. He's just like the biggest racist in town for a long time. And then there is a witness who goes before the House Select Committee who says, I was told to go out to John Sutherland's house in Sykeston, and John came to the door, and he was wearing a Confederate gray hat, and he invited me into his living room that had Confederate memorabilia all over the walls, and he said, I'll give you like $70,000 to kill Martin Luther King Jr., and this witness was like, no way, I'm out of here. I won't even consider that amount of money. But then later, there's all this like stuff about James Earl Ray is in a Missouri penitentiary. He escapes from that and goes back to St. Louis to the Grapevine Tavern, which is owned by his brother, also a big George Wallace hub there. And then he lights out for Canada, comes around back. He's all over the place. He gets plastic surgery. It is like, the Ray story is like totally insane and all over the place. And there's a bunch of books. William Pepper, I think, is the lawyer who wrote about who wrote a really good one about the King assassination. But eventually, the House Select Committee is not sure, basically, at the end of their conclusions, though we are going to get more files next year about this, supposedly. But there's the St. Louis plot that like factors in pretty heavily that just says John probably busted James Earl Ray out of prison, met him at the Grapevine, gave him the money, or at least proposed it to him, and then set him on this path after King. The problem that I've always run into and that lots of scholars run into is that proposition was being done by a lot of different people all over the place. Right. There's like an Atlanta conspiracy of businessmen who are doing the same thing in Atlanta prisons. There's a whole thing about the Ku Klux Klan in Mississippi as being basically guns for hire. And then the Pepper theory is that there is a team of snipers from the U.S. military who are dispatched to Memphis, and they are who do it. And that Ray is just like a fall guy.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Well, a lot of question marks there, but
yeah,
never subject to the same speculation or narrativization as JFK or his brother.
Yeah.
So, okay, getting closer to the present day, like we have, like I said, like these repeated cycles of boom and bust in the city of St. Louis, of like an economy growing and then collapsing, deindustrialization happening, changes in infrastructure, waves of immigration, but like underneath it all, there's still a repeated story about racist violence, like racist policing, counter reactions to that, and like these explosions of violence that occur. And I said that your book is bookended with Ferguson, and I was wondering, like, could you give our listeners some context into St. Louis history, and why Ferguson became such a flashpoint, and why it does still loom so large in the minds of both kind of like racist and the racist imagination of America?
Yeah, I mean, it is like, again, I think that's like a prime example of one of the there's fracture lines through St. Louis in the 30s and in the 60s. And in similar economic conditions, you get Ferguson. There's a really good book that I cite in in their Phil Neal's Hinterland, which is basically arguing that like the civil unrest of our era will come from the suburbs because that's where the slip.
J.G. Ballard wrote many novels with that theme as well.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh man, if it's not going to be full of appliances or like graveyards of appliances and stuff like that. And that like Ferguson is
a former sundown town. I totally forgotten that as well.
Yeah, and it's because also St. Louis sort of grew off of the river westward and sprawled, and then became this big constellation of counties and municipalities in order to hoard wealth into certain white ones.
But in Ferguson especially, was a former sundown town in which the surrounding counties were basically funding a tax base through enforcement of things like traffic violations in Ferguson. Yeah. So it was like a secondary form of taxation on the people of Ferguson imposed on them via the police.
Yeah.
Through like the surrounding white suburban counties and districts.
Which is like the ultimate, I think, like tragedy of Ferguson is that all of this national attention arrived at St. Louis and starts looking around, and they immediately see that this municipality, as you're saying, is a machine for extracting money from poor people. It's like an immiseration machine, but it also happens to be home to Emerson Electric, a giant billion-dollar Fortune 500 company that has their campus out there. And so it's a bunch of impoverished people who are being just like ground down for jaywalking and for getting a parking ticket for running a stop sign or something like that. And then there's this like it's like almost a perfect encapsulation of neoliberalism. Walter Johnson wrote a very good essay about this called Ferguson's Fortune 500s. And that Michael Brown then becomes, the last straw for people everywhere and becomes such this like metaphor for the rest of the country. Like St. Louis throws off these metaphors, I feel like pretty frequently, because then you have also the counter metaphor of like the McCloskeys pointing guns at Black Lives Matter protesters. They're sort of like the symbolic infrastructure there just keeps
the joining of the continent, the continental shelves of the American imagination is sort of coming out of St. Louis.
Yeah, they're like grinding against each other there. And the Veiled Prophet is like sort of the uniting thing that's happening in the background of like, well, how did this municipality become this way? And it's like, well, if you look at the history of St. Louis, it's always been sort of controlled by this group of business elites, and it's always been trying to cook up this hyper-extractive form in all of these counties. Because the opposite is true in Ladue, which is not very far from Ferguson, where all of the wealth in Missouri basically resides.
So the present day, like in present day St. Louis, for the present day Veiled Prophet Society, what are they up to today? And like, have they given any comment or reaction to the release of your book?
They have not commented. They have not responded to my inquiries. Very surprisingly.
They gave you an eyes wide shut card.
yeah. Not even an eyes wide shut card. Isn't that rude?
Yeah, I know.
Give me something portentous.
That was embossed. That was on some nice like business card.
Come on. I'm worth it. Wouldn't you know it? 2 years ago, they said, "Hey, we've heard the outcry, and actually, we got rid of the Veiled Prophet." Right. So now the group is called VP St. Louis, and by the way, VP doesn't stand for anything. It's just letters.
Okay.
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 Okay. And then the second part is that we got rid of the guy. So don't worry about that. And then we waited a little bit for the ball to happen. And then a bunch of photographs come out. First of all, Bengal Lancers in blackface. And then there's a character on stage, and he looks a lot like the Veiled Prophet. But no, that's the Grand Oracle.
Stands for vagina pussy, by the way. Hey, you have a line in the sort of the epilogue to the book that I thought was fascinating. And you write here that the largest threat to the contemporary Veiled Prophet Society is the fact that individual billionaires are powerful all on their own. They don't need the coordinative influence of a group anymore.
Yeah, that's really true in St. Louis, and I think everywhere else. It's just... In St. Louis, there's a crazy libertarian billionaire named Rex Singfeld who's obsessed with chess. And So he made St. Louis, like he spent millions and millions of dollars making St. Louis the chess capital of the world or of the United States, something
We're
like
changing
that.
all the sidewalks to white and black squares. Yeah.
He would do that.
Yeah.
Don't give him that idea. He would do that. There's like random chessboards everywhere
with a libertarian billionaire's money.
But he's doing this chess move, and then on the other side, he's like funding the most just corrosive politics that wants to bankrupt and destroy the public sector in the state. There's the Cargill lady. I forgot what her name is, but she's the inheritor of Cargill, or has a big stake in Cargill, which is a company that delivers grains from the field to the grocery store and owns basically the entire network of that agri-system in the Midwest. And she's infinitely wealthy. And then you got David Stewart, who's an African-American CEO who's obsessed with Christianity, who like sends prayers sometimes to his programmers. And he's in charge of worldwide technology. And then you also have like Bob Clark, who's a cement baron, who gave the mayor, when she was running for mayor, he gave her $100,000, and now suddenly a bunch of Bob Clark's data centers are being very, greenlit, put up, considered, talked about in this way. Like, we're going to do it kind of differently and better here.
Basically, any individual, anyone with enough money and power, and with the attendant power that comes with it, can sort of start for themselves their own secret societies now, which gets us to the recent story about Peter Thiel's, like, the Discourse Collective, or whatever the fuck it's called. And, like, look, because it's Silicon Valley, because of our current, the impoverished imagination of our current culture,
right?
There's no cool code words or anything like that. This is just like a super exclusive TED talk for like the top 50 business and like op-ed columnists or just Peter Thiel's friends. But like, despite the fact that it lacks the pageantry, the sort of the mythology, the symbolism of
any of the fun, like no.
But it does strike me that essentially like the same problem still persists for these people.
Yeah,
which is that they have all of the money, they know it, and they want more of it for themselves to the expense of everyone else. But deeper than that, for guys like Elon Musk or Peter Thiel in particular, as you said, the idea that there's one master race, or that there's one race that's superior in terms of value or IQ to everyone else, or the idea that universal suffrage is a bad thing and not to be desired, is a very small minority of opinion still in this country.
Oh, yeah.
So there is still this need to kind of create these kind of, I don't know, like subterranean or kind of, I don't know, countercultures to a mainstream of American life that still believes like, in democracy and civil and equal rights for everyone.
Sure. You need a dark enlightenment movement in order to make it seem, cool.
That's a great example of that, of this same bullshit. It's like the Enlightenment, but it's dark.
But it's dark and kind of edgy. Yeah. And I think it also fits the mold of just like, these people want to be able to hang out with each other and feel like they're in an in-group and that they have friends. But I think the bigger goal is to try to set up an influence network of we're all on the same page about exactly what game we're playing here, especially with like the things that you're teaching of like, here's how you survive World War III. Dog, you're not going to survive World War III. I'm sorry.
None of us are, man.
No, dude, there's no way. Come on. But then also to be like, also we can improve your sex life with this class.
With AI. With Claude.
Cool. Ezra Klein, like steepling his fingers, listening intently. Interesting.
But like, so like for the Peter Thiel and his acolytes, what lessons are they failing to learn from a veiled prophet or a Ku Klux Klan style secret society? Is it just the lack of drinking, the lack of fun?
Well, I think systemically they made the mistake of trying to have an authentically secret society. Like the whole thing with the Skull and Bones is like, we all know about that. Yeah. That's what kind of adds to the allure that like creates the tractor beam.
It's always this contradiction because you can't have a secret society that no one knows about.
Exactly.
It defeats the whole fucking point.
You have to have a big parade and be like, we're all anonymous guys. I think that is like, that was the sauce that made the Veiled Prophet Society very successful, is that everybody's anonymous, but it's the biggest circuit judges and the mayor and the CEOs who are like they're showing off to you that they can have their own secret club and be up to something. But yeah, dialogue was just like authentically supposed to not be talked about or rumored. I don't know. In the Epstein files, there's like a whole thing about how Epstein says, yeah, Peter Thiel's been trying to put together a secret society for decades or for years or something like that. And that's an email from, I think, 2016.
So he's just getting around to it?
That they're trying to do it again.
Yeah.
So he has been trying to do this for a very long time. And I think it's not working because like you don't understand that's like, you need that public facing component.
Yeah. So to wrap things up here, like you mentioned the Epstein files, right? And like we are living in a time now where like if you are inclined to believe that the country, your life is secretly run by secret societies up to like deeply evil, depraved, nefarious things, that like they are the reason that has like checkmated you at every point, that indeed the system is rigged against you and it's being rigged by a shadowy cabal of people.
Yes.
Like we are living in times now that is like more fertile ground than ever for the belief in that.
Yeah.
In what ways do you think like the existence of something like the Veiled Prophet Society is obviously a confirmation of that fact, but on the other hand, like do you think it is perhaps like too narcotic or too easy to adopt a kind of secret society analysis of how power and money and influence works in the world?
Yeah, I think that a secret society is just a union for powerful people, right?
Right, yeah.
It's just an agreement that we're all going to pay dues to this one thing and then coordinate our efforts together. And that I think it is salacious, and that people, especially who aren't reading a bunch of Marxist history, sort of like would prefer to think of the Illuminati as being in control because it explains the class dynamic between the bourgeois and the rest of us. But that same thing can be applied the other way. Like the first unions are also secret societies. Like,
well, by definition, they would had to have been because they were illegal.
Illegal, yeah, exactly. The Knights of Labor famously like had a bunch of crazy handshakes and secret code words. And I think that the problem with really trying to analyze secret societies as, well, they created this world and they're doing all this stuff, it's not the thesis for me. The thesis is that the Veiled Prophet really well represents a symbol that the elite rally around that displays their psychology, that they want to be infallible, they want to be a patriarch, that they want to have slaves and dominate women and be in charge of
and
all
also
of the money.
And also sort of accrue for themselves the kind of the style and customs of like the Arabian Nights or medieval Europe, or like of some fantastical like historical period or people.
Because I think that makes it without any guilt, right? It's like guiltless wealth that you wouldn't have to think about how it doesn't give you any bad feelings to take that role on.
Yeah, but yet it is like what they want is a hierarchy of white over black, man over woman, owner over worker.
Yes.
And I think the interesting thing is like underneath all this this dumb gay shit that they do with this, it's like this is a mechanism of class solidarity, right?
Yeah. Of
enforcing and or rather reinforcing and sort of strengthening the bonds of class interest among a small group of people.
Yeah.
And the corollary to that would be like, well, what if there's a shared class interest among a much larger group of people,
right,
that were to organize and assert itself, or maybe even adopt their own customs, parades, costumes?
Perhaps.
What would that look like? Or is there a system of government that describes that?
Yeah, it's almost like you could have a counter Veiled Prophet ball where you could crown your own version of the queen of your ideal, and maybe that queen is, not what the Veiled Prophet decides is like the standard of beauty or whatever. In the 60s, there was the velvet plastic ball, which was like the hippie spoof ball that they did. And I would like to bring that back as like, we had also mentioned that at the beginning, all of these Victorian guys were like, when they were playing Demeter, they were dressing up in drag.
Yeah.
And so it's like the most powerful men in St. Louis in drag. We should just bring that component back, have a big drag Mardi Gras celebration that's a counter Veiled Prophet ball.
Who is the new Queen of America? That's right. Bugs Bunny when he dresses as a woman.
That's right. That hot babe.
Devin O'Shea, the book is The Veiled Prophet, Secret Societies, White Supremacy, and the Struggle for St. Louis. It is a great book, and it is a wonderful history of St. Louis and the whole sort of funny and fascinating ideas of a secret society that everybody knows about. Devin O'Shea, thank you so much for your time, and everyone, we'll have links to your favorite bookstore, wherever you want to get the book.
Yeah,
I'm sure you know where it's at. But yes, please check out the book. Devin O'Shea, thanks again so much for your time.
Thank you for having me on.